And we are live here on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. What's up, guys? Nick Script here on the P2W Fantasy Podcast. Still rolling through January, still rolling through the actual NFL playoffs. I'm very excited about the show today. I have two guests that I have yet to collaborate with, and I've been excited to have on the podcast here. So as we kick things off, I'll make sure that these guys can talk about what they do in the fantasy community before we jump into the show today. And what we're going to do, we're going to recap that divisional round from this last weekend, talk a little dynasty, talk a little content, and see where things go from there. But as I said before, want to make sure I introduce both guests, starting off with Eric, who contributes to Dr. Roto. I saw just doing some creeping earlier. NBA and football DFS plays. You had that going on. You also contribute for Going for Two, co-founder of the Pros vs. Joes Charity League as well, which you were kind of telling me a little bit about that through email, and it sounds awesome. So, Eric, thanks for coming on the show, man. Can you tell everybody where to find you and also what you do and what you got going on?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I've enjoyed your content for quite a while, so
Appreciate
definitely
that.
excited to jump in and take part. In terms of where you can find me, I always do this backwards. I'm over here at Fantasy Nav.
Somewhere down there.
Like you said, I contribute for drroto.com. I contribute for goingfor2.com. And really where I spend certainly the majority of my time and headspace is with the charity league. It's Pros with Joes. You can find us on Twitter at Pros with Joes, or you can head over to our website. It's proswithjoes.com. We just wrapped up our second year. We raised about $10,000 for charity again. This year, Matt Harmon and his co-manager were our champions. So all that money we raise is going to his charitable cause. It is an endowment for a former colleague of his at Howard University. So wrapping up the year here and getting ready for a bigger and better year three. There at the website, proswithjoes.com. If you are an industry pro and you want to raise some money for a charity, you can register and fill out a form therein. Or if you want to participate and potentially give some money to a charity, there's a separate form. It's all kind of laid out. Pretty simple website, so hard to get lost on there.
That is awesome. It's an awesome concept. It's nice to bring together, obviously, fantasy football, which we all love, some competitiveness. Obviously, your pros versus your Joes, and it's all for a good cause. And I know the charity, the leagues, and the focus is a big part of the community. So it's nice to see you have some success with that. Bruce on the show as well today, senior writer and ranker for DLF. You just dropped an early look on Kenneth Walker from Michigan State. That was today, I believe. So you're already diving into the class, breaking things down. You also write for Roto Baller. So, Bruce, can you tell everybody where we can find you on social media and what you're doing this time of year?
All right. You can find me on Twitter and pretty much all my social media accounts at Metric Scout. That's TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and all that stuff. Right now, going hot and heavy, getting ready for them rookie drafts, studying them rookies, the running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks, and all that stuff. Dropping content a lot over that on dynastyleaguefootball.com. Dropped one on Kenneth Walker. Last week, I dropped one on Garrett Wilson, and I think one maybe on Brees Hall maybe. But I'm also dropping a lot of that content also on the YouTube channel. You can find that linked out on my Twitter there. So it's probably right there at the top if anybody wants to check that out. But really hammering out this rookie class, really digging deep into it.
And it's never too early to start looking. I know some people in dynasty leagues who are kind of casual about it. They wait until 2 weeks before the NFL draft, and having an idea of some of the names that are in this draft class ahead of the game does give you a boost. And I know that's something personally I don't create content like that, but I like consuming it because it's something that I don't dive into. So I do appreciate that content. So if you are tuning in again, we are going through the divisional round from this last weekend, talking some dynasty. As always, this podcast is partnered up with the Fantasy Points Media Group, which is a branch of Fantasy Points. Go check out fantasypoints.com, one-stop shop for everything fantasy football related. Two great guests. Going to be a really good show. Stick with us.
no fear to give. I feel but I can't forgive. I go all in this time, yeah, I won't regret. I'll pick the best on trip, they don't understand. I play to win, yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Oh, play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win.
All right, so we'll kick things off today with the divisional round recap from this last week, and had some really nice games. The last one was an absolute shootout there. We'll start with the Bengals versus the Titans, though. This one 19-16 in the Bengals' favor. So really, really tight game, capped off by the rookie kicker. So what I'm going to be asking these guys is any sort of reaction, something that stands out from this game. It could be fantasy football related. It could be just looking forward in the playoffs. It can be focus on one player. It's really just an open sort of discussion here. We'll start off with Bruce. So with the Bengals-Titans game, what stood out to you? What's something that stands out from that game?
From watching this game, re-going over his stats, thinking about it, and one storyline that I can think of for this game is this is the game of top-tier stud dynasty long-term wide receivers. We got Jamar Chase, T. Higgins on one side, A.J. Brown, and then the old horse Julio Jones. Nice seeing him trotting around the field, catching some balls. Just seeing him just makes you happy and warm and bubbly inside. A.J. Brown, after an injured, riddled season here, catching 5 balls for 142 yards and touchdown, making some impressive grabs. And it's just a good thing to see two teams with a lot of stud wide receiver talent on the field just clash against each other and just watching them go off like that.
And it's interesting with some of the names you mentioned. You know, A.J. Brown, little frustrating at times during the fantasy season because he wasn't healthy every game. And then Julio Jones, you see him in Week 18 outside of the fantasy season for most leagues, have a really nice game. And then in this game as well, had a good one as on top of that. So it's almost frustrating from a fantasy perspective because you're like, I could have used this during the actual season, but it's nice to see these guys healthy. I slammed the over on some Julio stats because he's healthy. So I'm wondering, you know, what that's going to look like come next year. Do you have any speaking specifically on Julio? Do you have some optimism for him for next year, or is it getting to that point where, you know, you're really going to bank on health, I guess?
Optimism, it really depends on how far you want to put your optimism. Is he ever going to be a wide receiver one again? Probably not. Is he going to give you a return on investment to where he's at in dynasty leagues? Because he pitfalls a lot in startup drafts. So if you're catching him on the cheap and you want somebody for the short term for a little bit, then yeah, he can probably give you a little bit of ROI, give you some games. But long-term wise, optimism, it's really the A.J. Brown show. Hopefully gets back to health. Maybe we can see some of these 6 catches for 62-yard games next year and get a little something, maybe a couple wide receiver 1 week, some wide receiver 2 weeks, and call it a day. Use them as a flex here and there. But really, it really depends on how far he falls or how cheap you can get him. In Dynasty, you may be able to get him for next to nothing on the trade market just because of the age, just because of the stigma from this year. Really, It just depends.
Absolutely. So definitely a good game for wide receivers in this one. A.J. Brown, you mentioned 5 for 142 and a touchdown. I mean, that's why he's ranked so high in most people's dynasty rankings, because this is what we expect out of him. Eric, same question. Bengals Titans. What stood out to you in this game?
And the thing that I really walked away from that game with was really just optimism for the future for this Bengals team, right? They're at least a year or two ahead of schedule. And while they were able to get away with the win, there are so many little flaws in all of their young players' games that with a few more seasons, they're going to improve. And this team is going to be terrifying, right? We all saw the playoff record 9 sacks that the Bengals gave up. I would say at least 5 of those were on Joe Burrow just holding the ball too long, right? He cleans that up, and that's just more productivity down the field. You think about Jamar Chase in his first season. He had that little quick out that he caught for 40 or 50 yards, and if he just takes the right line, it's easily a 90-yard touchdown. Like, this team is electric, and they still have a ton of room for improvement. So I think we're going to be talking about the Bengals for a long time to come.
I do want, on a side note, want to shout out Nate Williams in the chat here. But Yeah, it is interesting. So, I mean, they got a big game coming up, the Bengals, right, against the Chiefs. So one thing I wrote down about this game, I wrote down, and I'm not a big. I play IDP in a home dynasty league, so I'm interested, but I don't like make the content or anything like that. But I wrote down Logan Wilson, 6 tackles and an interception. To me, that is important because playing the Chiefs this week coming up, somebody is going to have to step up on that side of the ball. I mean, if it was him in this game making some plays, someone's going to have to be a playmaker on that side of the ball because we see what the offense can do, even when they're struggling. I mean, Joe Burrow in this game threw 0 touchdowns, right? But they still got the win off. So, I mean, if the defense can step up in some sort of way against the Chiefs, it's going to be huge, but we're going to need some playmakers to make those stops. We saw what happened with the Bills with 11 seconds on the clock. As far as the wide receivers go, and I'll just throw this out there, just an open discussion. So Chase, 5 for 109, Higgins 7 for 96. Are you guys pretty confident that this will be more of a consistent thing come next season? Or do you guys think that we'll go through some similar frustrations of what we saw during the regular season where both guys had really nice games, but then there's days where one guy's having an absolute monster week and the other guy's not doing much. Is this a good sign, just this one playoff game? Like, hey, maybe this is going to be more of a consistent outlook. Any thoughts there, guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly a sign of things to come in terms of Joe Burrow's ability to distribute the ball and to feed 2 wide receiver ones from the same offense, right? A lot of that has to do with maturity in his game, right? And also we talk about those 9 sacks. If he has even an average offensive line, that's more time for plays to progress, for him to go through his reads. And I think that sort of smooths out those sort of lumpy weeks where it was either all Chase or all T Higgins. I think going forward, they're both still going to eat and produce at a wide receiver 1 level.
I feel good about both of them, especially for the long term. I feel like this is a good sign for things to come, but I felt like this for a long time. I feel like there's going to be a lot of natural volatility because obviously you're going to have some games where it's just Higgins, some games where it's just Jamar Chase, and that's just natural game script dependency. But all in all, when you look at things from the back end, when we're going forward onto these seasons, they're going to be hitting more times than not. They're going to be more consistent going forward because they're both very good wide receivers. I think T. Higgins, when it comes from a talent perspective, I think he's very underrated. I think we're going to be into his career another few more years, and we're going to be looking back at what he's doing, and we're going to be thinking, man, this guy's been underrated for a long time. Kind of like how people thought of DeAndre Hopkins when midway through his career, and people started looking back onto him and how they're like, yeah, he's really good. This guy's a stud. He's one of the best wide receivers. When he started getting, I think we're going to look back on T. Higgins, the early portion of his career and what he's building going forward, and people are going to be like, what? Yeah, we really underrated him.
Absolutely. And we see often, the guys that get the spotlight, the other guy can do just as good, if not better in some games. And still like the value sometimes is not where it needs to be from a talent perspective or even a production perspective, just because, a guy like Chase had the hype that he deserved this year. So I think, that trio for Dynasty is just unbelievably interesting because I feel like, long term, if we're looking, obviously we all play Dynasty in different windows, right? And that's the beauty of Dynasty. But from a long term window, 5-year window, it's unreal to think about those 3 in comparison to the big 3 on almost every other team. So definitely interesting. It's going to be a good game this weekend, hopefully. But we'll move on to the 49ers versus Packers game. So this one, 49ers took it away. Had some interesting stat lines and then some stat lines that we didn't expect. I mean, both quarterbacks did not throw a touchdown. That was interesting, I think, to me in this game. Obviously not the highest scoring of games, 13-10. So both of these games by 3, by a 3-point margin. Eric, what stands out for this game? 49ers, Packers.
Man, super interesting 13-10 game, right? At the macro level, this felt like the type of game that San Francisco wins, right? They need some big stops. They need some turnovers. They need some kind of fluky things to break their way in order to play and punch up to this weight class. And it all lined up for them. I was a bit surprised, right? You look at that first drive with Green Bay, and it was masterfully orchestrated. They were able to do whatever they wanted to. They marched right down the field. They go up 7-0. It seemed like it was going to be a very long day for San Francisco there in Lambeau. And then on the other side, I mean, the game plans that Shanahan designs are works of art. And Jimmy Garoppolo does everything in his power to just mess it up, right? You think about that awesome deep play down the seam to Kittle that Garoppolo was 2 or 3 steps behind him. It reminded me of that play in the Super Bowl to Emmanuel Sanders that was perfectly drawn up, and Garoppolo couldn't deliver the ball, right? So it's going to be another close one. A lot of things are going to have to line up well for San Francisco to prevail here in the NFC Championship game, but they've got a ton of athletes that ultimately answer the call every week. So it should be another fun one lined up.
Absolutely. To hold the Packers to 10 points, obviously part of the game plan is keeping guys off the field and limiting certain things, but they'll have a similar test coming up this weekend. But Bruce, same question. What stands out from this game, 49ers Packers here?
Once this game ended, we had a big storyline with Aaron Rodgers and Devonte Adams, the cap situation with the Packers. Where's Aaron Rodgers going to be at? Is he going to be with the Packers? Is he going to be with another team? Is he going to retire? We got Devonte Adams out there. Who's he going to be playing with? I don't think he's going to be wanting to play with any of these jabroni quarterbacks in Green Bay. So what's going to happen there? Packers are in hell with the cap. So what's going to happen with that? A lot of things are going to be changing there in Green Bay. I'm interested to see what's going to go on there. Is A.J. Dillon going to have more of a role going forward? Aaron Jones, he's looking good. He's playing well, but age is going to eventually creep in. Father Time always wins. So Green Bay may be looking different here going forward. Well, it will be looking different. They got to do something. So I'm excited to see where Aaron Rodgers go. I want to see the controversy on that because that's always fun to watch. And a lot of people were speculating, Denver? People want to go to Denver. So if everybody wants Denver, he's not probably going to go to Denver because that makes us happy for fantasy. So he's probably going to go somewhere else. Is he going to go to Pittsburgh? Is he going to where is he going to go? That's my big thing that I'm watching right now.
In all honesty, the potential for this Packers team to be completely shook up is fine by me as a Bears fan. So I mean, if things start moving everywhere else, that's fine. One thing that stands out about Aaron Jones, and I was starting to lose confidence in his long-term value because of the splits between him and Dillon, and it looking like a true committee when they're both healthy, and looking at the snap percentages, it wasn't looking great. He's no longer what he was before in terms of a guy that's on the field for 75% of the game. But in this game, I mean, 9 catches for 129 receiving yards. The one busted play, we can say, where he had the big gain, that took up a bunch of it. But I'm wondering, in a world where both of these guys are going to have to coexist, and Devonte Adams potentially not being a Packer next season, I wonder if that's the hope for dynasty managers for Aaron Jones. Is that both guys are going to be in the backfield, but now you take away Devonte Adams, and I'm not saying he's going to fill in for Devonte Adams, but will he just become this I don't know, Austin Eckler type of running back now? Moving forward, I don't know. You guys have any thoughts about that? Is that where his value is going to be? Is if he becomes this guy that gets 7 catches in a game, and only if that?
There's going to be a lot of volatility with this team. It really depends on who's going to be the point guard.
That's true.
Pushing the rock around. If he's got a quarterback that likes to check it down, and he could be the Eckler for this team for a little bit, he could be that. If the new quarterbacks down there wants to shoot it downfield as much as possible, we got jabroni wide receivers running around. It could be a mess. The wide receivers may not be getting it done. They may be shuffling both backs. We don't have all the pieces yet to know what's going to happen. I feel good Rodgers is gone, so we're going to get some changes, but I'm not for sure either. But there's also a chance in outside realm possibilities that Jones is a top dog wide receiver. Just got to see what's coming in.
Yeah. Any thoughts there, Eric, before we move on?
I mean, yeah, if Adams leaves, right, that's a huge target volume that now has to go somewhere else, right? Even if the offense isn't a like for like comparison. I think the comp as opposed to Eckler might be a little bit closer to like Kareem Hunt's role if AJ Dillon's hanging around.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think if Aaron Rodgers leaves, this Green Bay team is taking a long, hard look about their window to win. And they're probably trying to move on from expensive cap pieces like Aaron Jones. So I wouldn't be surprised if Aaron Rodgers leaves, if we see Aaron Jones packaged in a deal that gets them some pieces back and a little bit of cap relief.
Be interesting. Definitely interesting. Rams Bucks will move on 30-27 in favor of the Rams. So we officially are not going to see Tom Brady in the Super Bowl here. So Bruce, thoughts on this game?
The big thing here, and it's been ongoing all year. Well, there's actually two, but the main one here that keeps going through my mind is the connection between Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp and how real it's been all year and how to value that for the long term. Really, what I'm thinking about is just kicking the tires, see what offers are there, but I'm happy with the production between the two if I can't get any big-time deals. But really impressed between these two just linking up this year, because I don't think many people expected this much production out of him. And people thought he was good. People thought he was getting volume because of Stafford, but I don't think people thought he was going to go nuclear, go gangbusters like this. 9 catches, 183 yards, 1 touchdown, and he's been doing it all season long. So hats off to him.
Absolutely. And you always see people who, will be very general and basic and say, like, at some point defenses are going to figure these guys out. Well, it hasn't happened yet, right? And in this game itself, he took the top off the Bucks more than once and just was an absolute monster. I mean, the guy moving forward, it's going to be interesting to see, where he's going to be ranked, obviously, in a lot of these sites' dynasty rankings, because obviously next season, maybe you don't expect the same production for the total amount of fantasy points, but it can't be that far different, right? But yeah. Eric, same question. Rams versus Bucks. What's your thoughts on anything that happened for this one?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to have much anything other to say than to just sit back in amazement of what Cooper Kupp's managed to do in this 2021 campaign. I think there's an interesting comp between Stafford and Kupp and Burrow and Chase, right? Like the reasons why defenses aren't catching up to them is they're throwing the ball to places where he is not there yet, right? Like they are the only two people that knows where this route is going to end and where they're going to be, and that timing and chemistry is hard to quantify, but it's a real thing. The other note that I have, I mean, obviously he didn't have his best game by any means. 24 carries, 48 rushing yards, 2 fumbles. But the fact that Cam Akers is back out there and the Rams trust him enough to give him 25 some odd touches, and while it was against this ridiculously strong defense, still showed some bursts, still showed some ability to evade some tackles. I mean, it's just absolutely astonishing from a medical standpoint, but also the Rams loaded this dude up. Like, he is very clearly going to be their workhorse going forward. And I guess having an entire season off, he's got fresh legs. So a lot of reason to be optimistic about Cam Akers.
I agree. I tweeted something out about this earlier. Just the fact that, I mean, he didn't have a good day, right? Wasn't super efficient. He fumbled the ball twice in this game, but they are very committed to this guy. 24 carries. Sony Michel had 1, right? Unreal. And Sony had some really nice games for the Rams. So, it reminded me, very different, but it reminded me of, like, because I'm a Bears fan, so I'm talking about the Bears, of course. But Dave Montgomery, when he came back, Khalil Herbert was having those good games, and it didn't matter. He goes straight back to being like a guy observing the game. And that was the same here for the Rams. Brief question. I mean, we could talk 15 minutes about this, but
Yeah.
briefly, is Tom Brady coming back next year? Any thoughts? Because they said today, I mean,
Yes.
I guess he's taking some time with his family and this and that. I mean, of course he's going to say
No,
that. He's not going to make a decision today.
Tom Brady is taking some time so he can promote his answer on what's his show? Let's Go. He's going to drag this decision out for his podcast. But yeah, I don't see Tom Brady hanging it up after getting bounced out of the divisional round.
I think he's coming back too. I feel like I just watching him, his mannerism, he seems like he's got a lot in him still. Feels like he's got a lot of passion still. I don't see much drop off, much hesitancy. You know how you kind of like watched Roethlisberger these last couple of years, how it's kind of not good, and you can kind of tell the energy wasn't there at times. I don't have that feeling with them. I feel pretty good that he's coming back.
All right, last game to discuss here: Bills versus Chiefs. This one was an absolute shootout, right? I looked earlier. I think between these two quarterbacks, they had 7 passing touchdowns. The rest of the games combined had 4 passing touchdowns. So we had all these other games with 4, just this game with 7. Super exciting to watch. We thought that at the end of the game, one team had it, went to overtime, and it was a good one. It was a good one. I think we were spoiled with this game. This was like the Super Bowl in itself. It was the NBA All-Star with the way the defenses I think were playing in this. But Bruce, we'll start back with you again. Bills versus Chiefs. What are we thinking? What stood out?
One thing that stood out to me, going a little abstract here, but I was thinking about Devin Singletary. Saw a little chatter online. A lot of people were pumping him up. 4 straight RB1 weeks to finish the season. Had some runs this week in this game. 10 carries, 26 yards, though, 2.6 yards per carry. 4 balls caught, 25 yards. But they handed him the keys to the car. He took advantage of the opportunities. And I think his value is going to shoot up for next year. Just wondering if that's going to give a return on the investment once drafters start selecting him, or is this going to regress to the mean, or if this is going to improve? I'm very interested to see what Devin Singletary is going to be doing forward. Or I know Buffalo's kind of got this a love for drafting mid-tier cheap running backs, kind of like what they did with Zach Moss, like they did with Devin Singletary, what is it, 3rd-round guy or whatever.
Yep.
And maybe they just keep drafting mid-tier 3rd-round running backs, throwing them against the wall till another one sticks or something. So I'm very interested to see what this team does.
So I putting you on the spot. You have Devin Singletary, Dynasty. Is he a guy that you're going to hold because of the potential for him to continue to be the guy, because he's been the guy? Like, they've been using him as their workhorse, and he's been playing really well. Or do you use these last couple of weeks as some leverage to field some offers? I mean, it's very general, and it's going to depend team to team and what you are getting offered. But any thoughts there on if you had him?
If I had him, I just saw him experience a value change. So I'm just going to kick the tires with him on the open market. And what I would probably do, I don't have many shares of him, but what I would probably do usually in this situation is when I do kick the tires is I'm probably going to try and package him up with my picks or a mid-tier player and try to get a better running back, a younger wide receiver, try to package up for something I want, trying to play around, see what the other managers want. If it doesn't happen, I'm cool with having them and holding them. But every time when I see a value change with a player, I want to be active. I want to be exploring the trades. So I'm going to try and just kick the tires. Usually in these situations, I never call them buys or sells, really. I just say kick the tires and be active, because idle hands in dynasties is the devil's workshop.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think timing's important too. Things are still fresh right now. So I think just like kind of surveying the room, right, and saying, you don't have to say much. You can just, it speaks for itself when a guy's had multiple good weeks in a row and everybody just saw him on TV this past weekend, right? Mm-hmm. So I think timing's important, just to kind of put it out there and see what things are looking like. But Eric, same question: Bills versus Chiefs. What stands out?
I mean, there's so much from this game. It's really hard to jump in on just one thing. I wish we could just run this one back, go best 2 out of 3 for the Super Bowl. I wish we had the college overtime rules so this game could have gone on until 3 a.m. Right, but ultimately, we're in this spot. I think just to sow a bit of controversy, I think this loss was earned by the Bills when first they didn't squib that kickoff. Like, anyone who's ever played Madden knows that you take 5 or 6 or 7 seconds off the clock with a squib kick. And then like when the Chiefs did have the ball on that 13-second drive, they were playing the softest prevent defense. They were still protecting the sidelines. Like, the Chiefs didn't have 3 timeouts at their disposal. It really felt like their execution came up flat in those 2 critical instances. So obviously it was an amazing game on both sides, but in those last, I guess, 14 seconds, two very bad decisions left them on the wrong side of this one.
Yeah, the overtime is like the finger point, right, to why they lost, but they did allow what was it, 50 plus yards in what, 11 seconds. Like, at some point you kind of have to look at that, and it's a small window of time, and we can point all around, but frustrating for anybody who's going to lose that game just because of how good the game was and how it shifted back and forth with who we thought was in control of that game. I want to throw this out there and get your guys' thoughts, but CEH, so 7 for 60 and 1 catch. McKinnon, 10 for 24, 5 catches for 54. So obviously CEH, he had a big run or two. The efficiency looks good just on paper, 7 for 60, 1 catch only. But McKinnon's been playing really well for the Chiefs. Seeing him outtouch CEH 15-8, does that concern you, or is it just like a hot hand sort of thing? Are they utilizing McKinnon's skill sets to some sort of degree? I mean, if it was CEH getting 15 carries and McKinnon getting 8 catches, and we had that sort of split, maybe that would make sense. But he had more of both categories. And any thoughts there? Is that something concerning? Because obviously, again, dynasty-wise, people that have CEH might be looking at this saying, is this not the guy or what?
I kind of had this feeling going through draft season when Clyde Edwards-Helaire was coming out. I figured he'd be efficient. He'd be used in the passing game. But eventually they're going to want that quicker running back. They're going to want that home run hitting running back. And I didn't think it'd be this quick. I didn't think that happened. I don't know if Jerick McKinnon is going to be a long-term thing, but I do know that extra pop helps out the offense a lot. I know Clyde Edwards-Helaire is dropping in value a lot in Dynasty long-term. I mean, he's cheaper, but I think he's still going to be a little bit expensive. Like, you're going to have to pay a little bit to get him. But if you're interested in him, it's going to be a good time to buy him. Another thing, too, is he's in a generational offense, first-round draft capital, started the season out injured, and had some injuries throughout the year. So that may be playing into this as well. We don't really know, but that could be what we can hang our hat on if you want to buy Clyde Edwards-Helaire, that he comes back healthy next year, looks a lot better. Another thing, too, though, it may not be it with him. He doesn't have the burst. He doesn't have the long speed. And maybe they found a good pairing here with him and McKinnon, and maybe they rock that going forward, or they explore other options. But we're at a crossroads here. He's either going to go one way or the other, and we got to place our bets on one spot.
Eric, any final thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, look, happiness in life, in fantasy football, it's a product of expectations, right? And I can't think of an incoming rookie running back that had higher expectations heaped onto him coming in. And in reality, like, I think he's going to settle into where he should have been considered coming out of the draft, and that's right around like 55 or 60% of touches, right? I think this game in particular, it was more about easing him back from his injury. If you think about how the game unfolded, it was all Jerick McKinnon, all throughout the beginning part of the game. And then CEH on consecutive plays had a big run downfield, and then he had a big protection pickup. And from that point, his usage started to walk up. So I think going forward, Darrell Williams is kind of the wild card here. But ultimately, I think we see CEH kind of right back around that 50% line in terms of total touches out of this backfield.
And I think Williams, he might, if I'm right, I think he's going to hit free agency. I think. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they handle the pairing there in Kansas City. But yeah, we got some interesting games coming up this weekend. Down to the Final Four here. So very, very fun football still to watch. I did want to hit you guys up on some dynasty topics. So I gave you 2 super general questions because this off season, I want to hammer a bunch of reflections and dynasty topics because we still got people that are active all year round and who are too into fantasy football like myself. I'm not going to speak for you guys, but yeah, a dynasty topic here. So first one, who's a player you feel like took a significant jump in their dynasty value this season? So we're looking at maybe a guy that the beginning of the season, he was down the list of rankings for any position, and then based off of performances this season, it drastically changed, which happens always in Dynasty. We have values go up and down, but who stands out as a guy that maybe to you personally or just in general, you say, hey, you know what, because of this year, he took a jump in Dynasty. And we'll start with Eric on your opinion here.
Yeah, so the guy that jumped out the page for me is actually someone that we've been talking about here for part of the show, and that's Devin Singletary, right? I tend to agree with Bruce. I don't think that he is going to be a world beater or a game changer for the overall makeup of your dynasty team, but in the places where I have him, I mean, there were several startups I did last year where he wasn't drafted and I was able to snag him off of the wire, right? So to now have him in a position where it looks like at least the majority of the volume is his for the taking, I expect that to at least be the intention for the Bills carrying forward. So to get, a contributing player for a guy that was basically free this time last year, I mean, that's a huge improvement, even if he's not, that bell cow back that we like to build around.
And it was definitely interesting with him this year to see the shift because obviously, there was a time where some people thought, it was going to be Moss's job. And then we had Matt Breida, who was like super relevant for 2 weeks or whatever the case was. But he spent, a good chunk of weeks 3 through 8 under 46% of the snaps. And then if we look at the end of the regular season, 14 through 18, he had weeks of 82, 93, 80, 76% of the snaps. And that's a huge difference to see that shift because it wasn't that way at the beginning of the season. I think only the first game did it look anything like that. So definitely interesting to see that. He's a guy personally I was never super high on, but when a guy is consistent in the way he has been at the end of the season, you have to take notice and kind of pivot for, your opinions. Does that mean that he's going to be a top 10 guy next season? Probably not. But again, value from the start of the season until now, huge change for me personally. So, Bruce, any thoughts on Singletary? And then let me know a guy that stands out to you that had a significant jump in value this season.
Yeah, I think Singletary, you may never count on him as your RB1, RB2, but from a team building perspective, when you're shelling out a roster, you're looking at values. I mean, he's a good guy to have for the mix. You're talking about a season where we had so many injuries, guys coming out with COVID, all kinds of different stuff going on. He's getting production, getting touches. And then also he's this piece that has a value influx. So if you wanted to use him to get something else, you can. There's a lot to like about him. And just because you don't capitalize on the increased value now doesn't mean people are not going to like him in the summer or whatever. If you want to feel like you need to make a change or if you need to work up in that rookie draft, I think he's a good piece to have on your roster. Especially, I love that value influx with him. And there were some good things coming out of college in his prospect profile is lateral ability to read the momentum of the defenders around him in the open field, good vision, plays bigger than his size. I mean, there's some good things about him, though. He's a good running back. Fantasy-wise, a little different, but he's always a good running back.
Who's your guy that stands out for this category?
Going into the offseason, during rookie drafts, Jalen Waddle was pretty much a speculative asset being drafted in the middle of the first round. And then this year, and it was kind of quiet. He had 4 wide receiver 1 weeks, 4 wide receiver 2 weeks, and then 11 of his games were in double-digit fantasy points. And now he's considered almost like a top 10 wide receiver in Dynasty. If you put out a Dynasty rankings anywhere on the internet, people are going to be commenting, where's Waddle, where you have him ranked. People are very interested in this guy. His value has went up immensely. I don't hear many people chattering up about that, but a lot of people are interested in Waddle. His connection with Tua, it's very similar to what we talked about earlier with like Burrow and Chase. And who was the other quarterbacks we were talking about? But it's very similar to that. Tua and Waddle, they already have the connection. He also has the speed to get the yards after the catch. And they did a cool thing with him this year where they targeted him on a lot of short passes, getting him that short yardage volume to get him worked in. And his value really increased this year from being a speculative asset, probably in a startup draft, being drafted probably in the mid rounds or so, and now being a top 10 wide receiver-ish, depending on how that league values them when they're drafting. But a lot of people are valuing them in that spot from how I gauge the market.
I like that call a lot. My pin video on my Twitter page is actually a board session. I do these board sessions sometimes about Jalen Waddle, and it was a huge hit because I mentioned, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. Like those are the young guys that we talk about so much. And I'm not saying his value is, similar or near those two guys, but if we're looking to trade high sometimes, which we also don't talk about enough, I feel like in Dynasty, I think Waddle's a great target because I feel like, the connection with Tua, say what you want about Tua, but those two look good together multiple times for fantasy this season, for Waddle's scoring. And then Tua also had plenty of games above 70%, for his completion percentage. So, I mean, being efficient year one with Waddle, I thought was huge. And also you just look at the fantasy scoring, 16 plus fantasy points 8 times, 20 plus fantasy points 4 times for PPR, wide receiver 14, wide receiver 15 in points per game. I mean, he is a whiff of mine personally because I wasn't against Waddle, but I'm looking at my dynasty teams and my fantasy football teams this year. I had 0 shares of Waddle, and that's something I regret because I feel like that value took a massive jump, and now to trade for him, you're gonna have to pay up. Maybe not Justin Jefferson, money, but you're gonna have to pay up for sure. And he was very impressive this year. Eric, any thoughts on Waddle?
I mean, nothing that really hasn't already been said. I think he's firmly in that wide receiver 1 conversation for dynasty startups. I've got him at 13, so kind of the first man out, but point persists, right? And the thing for me, I don't have him much in dynasty either. I got him basically for free in redrafts, a couple of spots where I did, but kudos on what was this Brian Flores coaching staff for scheming ways to get the ball into his hands, right? It is not often that you get a 4-3-2 guy on your team. So if you can make it a point to get the ball in his hands and let him go do work, you have to do it. And he absolutely showed what he's capable of. So he's earned that, in my case, borderline wide receiver 1 categorization.
So my guy, and I promise, like I podcast every week. I don't talk about the Bears a lot, and I've talked about them like twice now on this podcast. So I promise I'm not a big homer. There's no reason for me to be a homer, but Darnell Mooney stands out to me because, looking at the value before the season, where he was being drafted, I think he was being drafted somewhere in like the 40s for the wide receiver position. And ADP means nothing at this point, but it's always nice to look back and say, hey, this is where he went versus what he was. And he was the wide receiver 27 weeks 1 through 17 for PPR purposes. And he was better than that mark 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. He had 2 times inside the top 5 for the position this year. He had 4 games this season during the entire regular season above 120 receiving yards. He handled volume pretty well. I mean, some games weren't super efficient, but he had a lot of big games this week. And Justin Fields has to clean up things, right? He's got to progress on some of, the reads, and not turning the ball over is going to be huge, and getting rid of the ball is going to be huge. But seeing their connection this season, I think for Dynasty, I think it means a lot because I think Fields is a guy that can push the ball down the field. No pun intended there. And Mooney's a guy that just balled out this season. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see where he goes next season. I don't know if he's going to be the wide receiver 1 on this team. It'll be interesting to see what they do, in terms of, probably letting Allen Robinson walk away, which is fine, and then bringing in somebody else. But I think that seeing what he did this year and seeing those huge games, you have to be excited about him, I think, to be a consistent flex play on a weekly basis. I think. So Darnell Mooney's a guy I was not very high on, but seeing so many big games this year, I think he's going to take a decent jump in dynasty rankings. But I'm curious to hear, and you guys can just chime in. What's your guys' thoughts? Did the shift for Mooney stay the same, not matter too much, or change a lot for you guys?
I think he definitely took a step forward, right? The thing that's going to be tricky is really the timing on all of it, because if and likely when A-Rob leaves Chicago, his price is just going to go through the roof, right? So there's a little bit of a window of time where there's some uncertainty that you can capitalize on, but once it is, in stone that he is the one there, his stock is gonna explode. You're gonna have to pay through the nose if you want to acquire him.
I loved him as a cheap speculative asset in rookie drafts when he was coming out, because just watching his tape from Tulane, you saw that speed getting downfield and the ball skills of him rising up. And I didn't know he was going to hit like this. Wasn't really no one was really expecting it, but you're just kind of wishing it would happen. Like, you put that cheap chip on him and you hope it goes off. I see a good rise in value, especially if A-Rob's gone, he's going to go up. I think if someone has him on his roster and you approach that person with a trade, I think you're going to be surprised with how hard it's probably going to get the trade for him. I'd be too scared to trade him away for cheap. I would want some insurance on the back end for some extra picks or some prospects or something. I'd imagine a lot of people, after seeing this year, after really thinking about this offense, especially if they like Justin Fields at all, which a lot of people do, and they see what Robinson's been going through, and you're just playing all this through your mind, and you got a young player who's being productive. It's real. I think it's going to be really hard to buy him in Dynasty. Probably the best way to get him is probably in startups.
Yeah, absolutely, because then it's fair game across the board. But if I roster him, there'd be no reason for me to speculate like, oh, what if he regresses next year or something along those lines, because now you have something that was worth okay amount and now might be pretty attractive in terms of some trade talks. But I do want to shift into this last topic before we hit the hour mark. We got like 12 minutes left.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
I got one last thing with Darnell Mooney. It just went
go
to my head. The floor here, the downside here, let's say worst comes to worst, since he's a downfield separator, is he's going to be an air yards guy for you and good in the flex plays. So he'll have splash games either way. So worst comes to worst, you got that. So it's not like you're going to get a player that, say, bad things happen to the Bears. He's not going to completely tank on you. Yeah.
That's a good point. Because in best case scenario, he's a guy that you start every single week. Worst case scenario, he's a guy that you're banking on one of these 120 receiving yard games, and maybe it's not consistent. So I like that. I like that point in itself. So last dynasty topic here before we close things up, but sleepers. So Eric, I think you and I were talking earlier in the group chat, and I kind of left it wide open, because how Bruce defines a sleeper, Eric defines a sleeper, and I define a sleeper in fantasy is probably three different things. It's probably the same sort of like direction, but you can take it wherever you want to go. So I left it kind of open for that. So I asked these guys beforehand, who's a dynasty sleeper that, people might be trying to acquire, or they are trying to acquire this offseason. And again, sleeper can mean different things. So we'll start off with you, Bruce. Who's a dynasty sleeper? So maybe somebody that's not massively expensive, not massively overhyped right now.
All right. So I had one name picked out, and then one's going through my head. So I'm going to talk about both of them.
Go ahead. All you.
So the first one, the one that was planned for me to talk about, is Gus Edwards for the Ravens. ACL this year. didn't get to play. Everyone's focused on J.K. Dobbins. Everybody loves J.K. Dobbins, but he's expensive. Everybody knows what they're going to get with him. They know he's going to get his touches. However, with the Ravens, they got over 800 yards out of Devonta Freeman, Latavius Murray, and Le'Veon Bell. They signed Gus Edwards to a 2-year deal. He's going to be back healthy. Everyone comes back healthy off of ACLs these days. So Edwards is going to be in the mix. Now, I guarantee he's going to be in the mix. Him and Dobbins. Is he going to be gangbusters? We're going to have to see. But we know the Ravens want to run the ball. We know running backs can be fragile at times, so there may be a chance through the season he gets a large bulk of the carries, but you got a team that wants to run the ball. They want to pound it out. So we could get a 1A, 1B situation with him and Dobbins, or Dobbins getting a lot of touches and Gus Edwards getting some of the money touches, or however that shakes out. But his price tag right now, RB47 in startup drafts. So almost 50 running backs are getting drafted ahead of him. And his ADP is at 142, so he's free. So there's no risk here. If he dies on your roster, you lost nothing. And the name that came out of my back of my head that while we were talking was Chris Evans, backup running from Cincinnati. He's got a little pop in his step when he runs. Joe Mixon, not multiple Mixons, but Joe Mixon has been injured throughout his career. Had a good year this year, but running backs are fragile. The fragility rate of running backs are pretty high. So with Evans having chops in the passing game, some burst, some wiggle, and him being dirt cheap, probably even cheaper than Gus Edwards, I think probably in the 200s in ADP, that I think he's a damn good buy, just as an insurance policy.
And he had two interesting games this year. One was outside the fantasy window, but week 6, 15.7 fantasy points, and in week 18, 15.9. And in both of those games, he had a mixture of carries and catches. So you did see the pop to the step because the average yards accumulated were pretty good for those 2 weeks. So that's interesting. I like that one, actually. I do. Eric, any thoughts on either one of those guys, Gus Edwards or Chris Evans? And then let us know your guy afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that comes to mind for both of them is the price tag, right? This is the foundation of any winning dynasty manager. You are willing to go out to the river and panhandle for gold, right? You got to shake through all that dirt, and eventually you'll find a nugget. And both of these guys really fit that bill for me. So definitely like speculating on these guys that are going to have a role, that with one or two things kind of breaking their way, they could have a significant role, right? So love the calls. In terms of the guys that came to mind for me, I was asking sort of how we define a sleeper, because one of the guys that jumps off the page is someone that is still relatively expensive, will take a lot of capital to acquire, but more so I think that his stock has taken a bigger hit than it should have, and that's DJ Moore. You know, we rewind to this time last year, and he was certainly inside of most people's top 10s. People were making sound arguments for even flirting with top 5. And, you know, looking at the year that he had, obviously his productivity on field did take a hit, but his involvement in the offense, his skill set, he's still 24 years old somehow. All of that still remains, and his quarterback play can really only go one direction. So if I can get him closer to, you know, wide receiver 15 price tag in startups, or on a discount if I'm trading for him, I'm all about it. The deeper cut that I wanted to pull up is again more of a timing play, and that's Russell Gage, right? We're right now in a window where we are somewhat sure that Calvin Ridley is going to be leaving town, but not entirely sure yet. And we look at what Russell Gage did down the stretch. He was wide receiver 10 from week 12 on. So he very much so showed what he can do if he's given a healthy volume. And I'm actually in a startup draft right now where he went almost at the end of the 14th round. So, you know, if we fast forward a couple of weeks, a couple of months where there's clarity on the Ridley situation, and he is in fact leaving Atlanta, I would expect his price tag to go up several rounds. So if you're out there, you're scratching the startup itch like many of us are now that the regular season's over, definitely seems like there's value to be had with Russell Gage as well.
And real quick, and I'll let Bruce say anything he'd like to about either one of those guys. But my only issue with DJ Moore is that I have a jersey of his, and he changed his number this year, so that really threw me off. But DJ Moore, former first round talent, right? He was another guy I was making a quick video of before the season that I said was getting totally overlooked in drafts, and he had some frustrating weeks this year. But we still see DJ Moore for what he is. I think he's a tremendous dynasty value, especially if things are more consistent and there's some more efficiency in Carolina. And Russell Gage, I mean, you mentioned the weeks, but looking at weeks 12 through 18, which again, 18 is outside the window for most leagues, but 18 plus fantasy points, 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And it's not like, he only had good games this season. We saw big weeks out of him last season too, and he's also a guy that gets plenty of. I'm like cracking up, not to cut myself off, but I keep getting these foreign YouTube comments.
Oh wow,
very interesting.
I love this.
Yeah.
Bot traffic.
Dan Brown, though. Yeah, Dan Brown's
that.
outside of that though. He's a good guy. He's saying things I can understand. But Gage, again, a guy who's gotten plenty of red zone targets too the last couple of years as well. Bruce, any thoughts on Gage, DJ Moore, both of them? What do we think here?
I really love DJ Moore. I want him on as many rosters as possible. And the thing about this is we may get to like 6 years from now, and it's going to be probably going to be like a Brandon Cooks scenario where we are just trucking through life, putting our rosters together, going through our seasons and whatnot, right? And then we're going to look past at DJ Moore's career, and we're going to like, damn, this dude was good. This dude was good, and we just did not give him the blessings he deserved. Kind of like how Brandon Cooks is, how he was productive with multiple different teams, had a weird career. DJ Moore's kind of having a weird career here too with Carolina, with these shifts in quarterbacks, weird volatility in offense, but he's still going to have those years where he's going to produce. He's still going to be productive, and it's going to be a long time. I mean, you look at some of these younger wide receivers and you try to forecast 5, 6 years or past. DJ Moore's one of those guys that when you play that storyline in your head, you're like, yes, this guy's going to be there way past 28 years old. He's at least going to be trucking it on the field. He's going to probably be there 30-year-old wide receiver, and we're just going to be wondering how is he doing it. Kind of like how we're doing with Brandon Cooks right now, because he's kind of got that skill set where he can run a good route tree. He's got that explosiveness and play slot, play outside, kind of do it all, kind of bag of tricks with him.
Absolutely with DJ Moore. I think too, for him, I think there's still some weird stigmas out there like that. Mm-hmm. He is going to be like, people make these like Juju comparisons and put like situations into the same bucket sometimes. But I think you can find ways to separate certain guys like that in terms of, being young and being productive and then dropping off a little bit, but kind of seeing the path for him to get back on track. So I do agree there with him. I'm going to do my last guy pretty quick here. Maybe I'll get some pushback. It's deep. It's deep, and it's not so for this player, I wouldn't go and like try to trade for him straight up, right? This is like an add-on to a trade. I think that's a way to approach some things, but I think Joshua Palmer is interesting because so he saw 60% of the snaps in 3 games. Those 3 games, 17.6, 15.3, 14.5 fantasy points. He did score in each of those games, so that obviously helps when you're scoring a touchdown. Looking at the Chargers, so Mike Williams and Jared Cook, they're unrestricted free agents in 2022. I don't know if either is going to be back, if both are going to be back. Both are going to be gone. Jalen Guyton, who I'm never a big fan of, but he's a guy that runs around on the field a lot. He's going to be a restricted free agent in 2022. So there's a lot up for grabs right now. And I know most of the community and guys that play fantasy are very high on Justin Herbert. And having a dynasty tie to Herbert, I think is interesting. So that the knocks that can happen on the flip side of this is that they bring in somebody, right? I mean, imagine a world where they go and like make a move for Devonte Adams or something crazy like that. I don't know anybody's cap space or anything like that. So they could bring in somebody else. They can bring back Mike Williams. They have Austin Eckler, who's a pass-catching running back to the max himself. But I think Palmer, just seeing when given the opportunity, him ball out in those games, it's interesting to me. And again, I'm not going to go trade directly for him because maybe that's not of interest. But if I can like throw him into a deal that's focused on somebody else, I might have some interest there. And again, the Tyler Herbert's just intriguing to me. But curious to hear. You guys can just jump in. Any thoughts on that? Am I diving too deep and optimistic here?
I feel like there's going to be an opportunity where his value is going to increase a little bit here in the offseason. I looked it up real quick. Chargers, 4th most in cap space, over $58 million. So there's a chance they could bring somebody in. There's also a chance they're not. People love Justin Herbert. People love this Chargers offense. Done some content on Palmer over last offseason. There's like an underground loving of him, of people that like him. So it really depends on what your league you're in, whether you can buy him or not. Like there's like in the South, it's kind of like the Michigan of the South, but Tennessee, they kind of got a little bit of a fan base. I'm from Ohio. You don't really notice it, but there's more of a fan base there than expected. So it may be harder to buy him than what's perceived, but I think startup drafts, we're going to probably see a little boost out of him, even if they add anybody, really, because there's also transitions when a new wide receiver comes to a new offense. Sometimes that does not hit instantly. Palmer's the young guy there. They drafted him, spent decent draft capital on him, not top tier, but there's a chance that he pops off. ADP wise, I don't know offhand off the top of my head, but I know he's going to be down there a little bit to where you can get him at a decent discount.
Yeah. Eric, any thoughts on Palmer as we close things out?
I'm looking to see where he fell in the startup that I'm doing right now on the side. He went in the 15th round. So pretty reasonable price overall. What I like about what you said, Nick, is just the idea of finding creative ways to get exposure to Justin Herbert and this Chargers offense. I think the biggest question for me for Palmer is he played more than a third of his snaps out of the slot this year. So Keenan Allen is going to occupy that territory for the foreseeable future, even if they lose Mike Williams, even if they bring another guy in. He's really going to be competing with Keenan Allen for that slot work. So if we are to see him take a considerable step forward, I think we're going to have to see him do something a little bit different on the field. And so that uncertainty, does kind of raise some questions, but he's a young kid. I mean, he's shown us everything that we would want to see and the opportunity that he's gotten. So as long as there's a path for him to getting more run, I think he's a reasonable piece to try to go out and target.
All right, fair enough all around there. We're past the hour mark, so I do want to close things up, but really appreciate both of you guys coming on the show today. Good stuff all around. I love collaborating with people that I have not, because we get good shows and we talk some football. So I do want to make sure that both of you guys get to let everybody know again where they can find you and plug anything you have coming up that you want to throw out there. And we'll start with Bruce on this.
All right. My name is Bruce Mattson. You can catch me on Twitter at Metric Scout, and that handle is good on all my social media spots, Instagram, which I never use, so I don't know why I'm saying it. TikTok for sure there. Got a YouTube channel. Just go to the Twitter. It's posted down there. You'll find it. I drop a video damn near every day. So if you're wanting to get ready for the rookie draft, that's a good place to start up at. Rookie profiles, rankings, mock drafts. Try to do a mock draft every week on there. So also senior staff writer for DynastyLeagueFootball.com, so you can catch my written content there, and also some at rotoballer.com.
All right. And Eric.
So I'll try to do it better this time. I'm Eric. You can find me at FantasyNav here on Twitter. Contribute for drroto.com as well as going4two.com. Charity League is, again, the thing that is closest to my heart. So if you're looking to learn more, if you're looking to potentially get involved, check us out at Pros with Joes on Twitter or proswithjoes.com. Shout out to the newest project I'm taking on, me and my dude Mike Holland at MC Holland 34. Just spun up this week a college basketball DFS show. It's part of the Dr. Roto Network. We're on every Friday night breaking down the Saturday afternoon slate. So you can either check out my Twitter or his, MC Holland 34. or on the late night shift on Friday, breaking down some of these hoops slates coming up on DraftKings.
Awesome. I'm a big basketball fan myself, so I'll have to check that out. But thank you guys again for coming on the show. If you guys listened live here or in your cars or wherever, really appreciate that. I'll probably be live like solo sometime this week, randomly when I get a small window where my daughter's asleep or something. So have a good night, guys. If your home team's playing still, good luck this weekend and enjoy the football while we have it here. Good night.